This time on Waters of Tomorrow, the Enterprise crew starts abducting people left and right.
Hello, everybody. I am Gep, and I'm joined, as always, by my good friend Dr. Izix.
Hi.
And this is Watchers of Tomorrow, the sci-fi review and critique show brought to you every week by two idiots.
Hey. Yeah, we're kind of ridiculous. Don't mind us.
This week we're doing a Star Trek Original Series episode, Tomorrow is Yesterday.
Yes. And speaking of idiots, I think we kind of fit in well with this episode.
Yeah. I think it is like one of my favorite episodes so far.
Oh, almost certainly. This is like it's just kind of weirdly fun.
Though there's some of it that just is, it's either nonsensical camp or just a full-on comedy routine.
Yes. and despite being ridiculous in its own special ways, you know, in Star Trek and all that, and even just in particular to this episode, it just kind of works in a weird way.
Yeah. There's lots of weird little guest stars in this one that I'm not going to list because there's too many random little people running around.
We're not meaning like little as in like generally small. I guess they're, you know, some of them are kind of thin, but you know.
Yeah, there's just a bunch of smaller side characters who don't really do much. The main guest star for the episode is Roger Perry, playing U.S. Air Force Captain John Christopher.
Yes, and he's been in a number of things, right?
Yeah, he's been around. Dang it, I forgot to write down his other main starring roles. He was a generally well-known actor in this time period for TV stuff.
He was in Chips as well as a one-time guy.
Yeah, he had a starring role. I think he had like 2 starring roles on other series, and then a bunch of guest starring roles, like a lot of the bigger name people do when we get into the main guest star of the episode.
Yeah.
So this was written by DC Fontana.
Yes.
This is the second time we've seen her pop up in a writing credit on this, though she has 10 writing credits and becomes the story editor later in season 2.
Mm-hmm. And the previous episode was Charlie X, I believe, right?
Yes, Charlie X.
And I think comparing the two episodes, it's very much night and day as far as my enjoyment of them.
Yeah, it really is. It's interesting. I don't see a lot of similarities, though. I think this one was, to my understanding, a little more original content by her, whereas Charlie X was written exclusively off of a brief that Roddenberry handed her to flesh out into a full script.
So it's like, well, I have full creative control here. I'm going to do something awesome.
Yeah, so it might have been a little more creative control. Might have been a little less Roddenberrying. There's still a little in here, unfortunately.
Yeah, well, we can get to that when it matters.
Yes.
Actually, never really matters in this case, right?
No, it
Hopefully.
doesn't.
Yeah.
I don't think so. So this is the thing. We're going to get to the synopsis in a second. Just, I'm having some trouble with this episode because while it's one that I really did enjoy a lot more than some of the other ones, it doesn't stick with me at all.
Yep. Here's some things that happened.
Yeah,
okay.
it I guess it's kind of got a narrative through line, but it's kind of loose, and it's really hard to remember the things, and it's really hard to remember what order things happen in after you've watched this. I've seen it twice, and I wouldn't be able to tell you what happened if I hadn't written it down.
Well, given that there's time travel involved, and it kind of ends in a certain way on that sort of front, I guess that's kind of to be expected?
Yeah, I suppose it ties in narratively.
It's an episode, a comedy of errors that means nothing.
All right, let's jump in, and then people can stop wondering what we're talking about, and I can just tell them.
Okay, go for it.
Oh, unlike other episodes, we actually open on stock footage of a U.S. Air Force F-104 Interceptor.
Neat.
Rather than the Enterprise, which is this is a kind of airplane. I wrote down the thing just so I wouldn't have to say airplane, but then I realized it's not clear that I'm talking about an airplane.
Yep.
It's really bad, grainy stock footage that juxtaposes very awkwardly with every other shot in the show.
Yeah, it's definitely the telltale signs of this was not filmed by our crew. Don't mind us.
A radar operator sees a blip suddenly appear on their screen, and they decide to send a plane up to investigate this UFO.
Yeah. Well, that's pretty cool. We're going to go meet some aliens. It's going to be great.
After some more stock footage of a plane taking off, we see the Enterprise flying through the cloudy blue sky.
And in the version I was watching, it's kind of funny in that the Enterprise is like, this is all this like special edition where it's all CG and such, but the Enterprise still looks like it's sort of wobbling back and forth.
Yeah. Well,
like it's on the street.
It's kind of funny because I looked up the original effects just to compare them. And this one looks like it's wobbling on a string. The other one is just a still shot of the Enterprise being slowly moved up at a diagonal.
Yep.
So, but neither of them look that good, to be honest.
I just have to give them props for, it's like, okay, you're making this actually look more silly, but I give you points for doing it. It
fits with the narrative.
Yes.
At least. So, yeah, we're going to have you do a physics explanation in a second here, though. Because in the next captain's log, the Enterprise was on its way to a starbase when it was caught in the gravity of a black star. They escaped, but the rubber banding effect of the gravity breakaway sent them out of control.
Huh. Well, they've ended up somewhere.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, it's time for the physics. What is a black star?
I don't know. Because I guess they could be meaning like a black hole, but
so yeah,
I'm not entirely sure.
I thought you might have had a little more nuance on this one. I did a tiny bit of research, and from my understanding, a black star is one of the theories that they had before it was kind of all codified into black hole singularities.
Mm-hmm.
So it was one of the things of like, this could explain this gravitational effect we are seeing. It could be like a star that has collapsed to a point that it's barely sustaining itself, so it still has too much gravity for most of the light to escape.
But it's sort of super dim in that case.
Yeah, and from what I understand, it still hasn't necessarily been disproven. It could possibly be an intermediary state between a star and a total collapse into a singularity.
Yeah, it's sort of sort of a quick primer on the sort of high density star objects like black holes. So you got black holes; they're the maximally dense singularity sort of space-time structure. You got a singular mass that is collapsed so compactly on itself that it has bent space-time in such a crazy radical fashion that light cannot escape its event horizon. And there's lots of crazy physics, and I'm not going to go into the full details there. But if you want to talk to me later, give me a poke. But anyway, generally next up on the sort of less dense, going from most dense to least dense, you got things like a neutron star, where you have the matter there is basically all the electrons and protons have been fused together into neutral particles or neutrons, and it's basically like a giant nuclei of an atom of in effect. It's very, very dense, and there's no space between the particles. And so they'd like to get close together, but they're just nuclear forces are like, we're gonna get you together maybe, but then the electromagnetic forces are like, when we start to bleed together, we're actually going to see our individual quarks, and we're going to be like, no. There's also some stuff involving the Pauli exclusion principle, but I'm not going to go into details there either. Sort of next up, you got your things like, partially degenerate, neutron stars, where it's mostly neutrons, but there's maybe a few protons and such hanging around. Then you got sort of next up a bit is your white dwarfs. Sort of like this is a core of dead star, but still kind of burning, but not really efficiently. And actually correct that, sort of super efficiently, because it'll actually burn for billions upon billions of years until it eventually runs out of fuel and just kind of goes dead. Maybe that's what they mean by black star.
Could be. It would be pretty dense. So
yes, and then I guess next up you got more normal type stars, which are just on the smaller side and denser side. So
Right. And we actually don't know what kind of gravity affects the ship badly.
Yeah.
Like, we're not sure. It can usually get out of a planetary orbit, but sometimes it has trouble with that, so...
Yes. And,
Anyway.
There's all sorts of mechanics of the orbits and things like that you can worry about with planetary orbits. But if you're just trying to sort of blast your way out of a star's gravity well, that's gonna be a little more tricky.
So we rejoin the crew of the Enterprise, all lying around on the floor. They start to stand up, put the bridge back together. Some of the chairs have fallen over. Scotty slowly starts bringing all the ship operations and power back into working order, and Spock reports that they have wound up in orbit around Earth.
Neat. We're back home. We didn't have to go anywhere.
Yeah, Sulu tries to bring them out of the atmosphere, but apparently the ship is responding very sluggishly to control. Uhura can't get a hold of Starfleet, but she is picking up a radio signal. They put it on, and it is the 5:30 Cape Kennedy News reporting that the first manned moon mission is scheduled to go next week.
Sweet. wait a moment. Are we only just now getting to the moon? But we have intergalactic spaceships here.
Once you have interstellar craft, the moon is just too boring, I guess.
Yep. It's like that episode of Futurama.
Kirk says that the first moonshot was in the late 1960s, and Spock says, apparently, so are we.
Huh. I guess that's one conclusion you can come to, yes.
Though apparently they realized that the whiplash from the Black Star sent them into a time warp back into the 1960s Earth.
Oh, here's another possible definition for Black Star. At David Bowie's last album. I mean, that's powerful enough to send them back in time.
I think so.
Okay, we figured it out. Okay, let's get going.
Okay. Uhura picks up a plane heading towards them, but the Enterprise is actually too slow to outrun it right now. So the plane makes visual contact and is ordered to close in and force the UFO to land. To prevent this, Kirk orders they lock on a tractor beam. Spock says that the aircraft may break up if they lock onto it with a tractor beam. The aircraft breaks up.
Whoops. Oh no. That thing we thought was going to happen actually happened.
Immediately. Kirk orders the pilot to be beamed aboard before his plane explodes, and Kirk meets a confused Captain John Christopher in the transporter room.
So I've apparently been abducted by aliens that looked like this guy.
Or Russians, I guess he thinks.
Oh, yeah.
Kirk apologizes for destroying the guy's plane, and he takes Christopher to the bridge. On the way, Christopher is surprised to see a woman, because we have to get some sexism into these episodes somewhere.
Of course. This is our Roddenberry moment of the day.
Well, there's another one coming up soon, but...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. You forgot about that one, didn't you?
I've been trying to forget a lot of things here. Don't mind me.
Blocked it from your mind. In the turbolift, Kirk explains that they are from the United Earth Space Probe Agency.
Wait a moment. Didn't last episode we established that there was an actual federation?
And earlier in this episode we established there's a federation.
Yep.
It's just in the turbolift they're the United Space Probe Agency.
Wait, maybe the turbolift is sponsored by the United Earth Space Probe Agency.
He explains that he is from Captain Christopher's future. Christopher seems to be relieved that they're at least humans, and he says he never believed in little green men, and as they reach the bridge, Spock walks up and says neither did he.
Real smooth, Spock. You got great timing,
It's a big green man.
Yep.
Christopher stares at more things, like other women on the bridge.
Dang it, Christopher.
Yeah.
Keep it in your pants.
Kirk and Spock discuss that they can't send Captain Christopher back to Earth now that he knows about the future, because knowledge of the future could be used to manipulate and change it.
So, centuries of the future with not a whole lot of info on the in-between times between then and now, and this is going to be useful how?
I don't know, but it just could change the future in some way at some time, maybe some way, somehow.
Yeah, well... that is a very, very apt observation. It just sort of how they detail it out is way beyond what he has as far as his knowledge so far.
Yeah.
So it's sort of like, what?
We get to see Kirk actually recording a captain's log to the computer in his room.
Yes.
That's kind of neat. Spock and Christopher enter. The computer now has a weird breathy voice.
Yeah, that's the thing I tried to
Yep.
forget, isn't it?
And it keeps calling Kirk dear.
Like, what?
Yeah, Spock explains that they can't fix the computer because it would need a full refit, and then explains to Christopher that they got repairs at a female-dominated planet, and they gave the computer a female personality. This is apparently the running joke of the episode.
Yep.
Now, this is interesting. This is cringy. I hated it. It's really kind of stupid. It has a couple of little funny moments, but it's mostly like, what if the computer were like acting like a horny secretary or something, which was just really stupid. But it is the first time we've ever had a B story in one of these episodes.
Yep. It's like there's something else going on here suddenly. It's not the main thrust of the thing. Wait, does this mean that they're trying to fill in time? They weren't just going to have more dramatic shots where people looked at each other pensively?
I know. There's like more. There's this, which I don't know if I would prefer this to people just staring at the view screen with dramatic music. But at least it's not people staring at the view screen with dramatic music.
Yep. It's something else.
After some joking back and forth, Kirk explains that Christopher can't go back with knowledge of the future because he might change stuff. Christopher says that him disappearing will probably also change stuff, but Spock says he's too unimportant to matter.
Thanks, guy. Come on.
Christopher is understandably upset about this. Scotty calls to report that they have almost fixed the engines, but also they've got nowhere to go.
Well, we're back in the 1960s. There's nowhere interesting to go exploring yet. Wait a moment, there's all of space out there. We could go, like, make first contact with the Vulcans and be like, hey, what's up?
Yeah. Change all of history. If we're stuck here, who cares?
We'll create our own federation with blackjack and hookers.
I do kind of just like how they've been characterizing Scotty in the last few episodes. Because he's just pointing out the obvious in, like, the funniest ways.
Yep. It's like... You know, it's not quite Scotty talk, but it's kind of like, yeah, here's the thing. Yeah.
A little later on, Spock reports that he's found more information about Captain Christopher, but all of a sudden they can't find Captain Christopher anywhere on the ship.
Oh no, he's gotten to escape pod and blasted off to Mars.
Yeah.
No.
Well, we see him wandering through the hallways, where he steals a phaser from a guard. They really need to hold on to these things.
Yep.
I was watching this. I saw him in the hallway, and I'm like, a guard is going to show up, and he's going to steal the phaser. And then the guard shows up, and he steals the phaser.
Yep. It's like, all right, Star Trek, we're not even like 20 episodes in. You're already becoming predictable.
Yeah, your security officers may as well not be carrying weapons at this point.
Yes.
It would be safer for everyone.
Or here's an idea. They carry weapons, but yeah, the business end is actually the reverse of what it looks like. So someone steals the weapon, they point it at some guy, and they fire, and then it shoots themselves. Brilliant.
Is that why by the time we get to the J.J. Abrams movies, these like got a little switcheroo thingy on the phasers? So maybe. Like it can shoot backward.
Guess I was setting it in reverse mode. I'm going to hand my weapon over to them. They'll never know.
Christopher uses his new shiny phaser to threaten the transporter officer, but before anything can happen, Kirk runs in and knocks out Christopher.
Yeah, Kirk just sort of ninjas in there, just like, oh yes, I'm suddenly here and no one noticed me.
Yes.
Hi.
This is a relatively pointless aside.
Yep.
Yep.
None of this matters.
That seems to be a theme for the episode.
Yep.
In sickbay, Kirk laments that they can't send the captain back, but McCoy asks about what they're going to do since they're stuck. They're going to run out of fuel and food, and they can't go back to Earth without messing up the timeline either.
Yeah, they're in a bit of a pickle.
They talk about whether Christopher could be taught to be part of their society, because apparently they think he's too dumb to function in their world.
Thanks.
That Spock comes in to report that he forgot to look at Captain Christopher's kids.
Oh!
And that his son is going to head the first Saturn probe that they send out to Saturn, which is a massive landmark event in space, travel-y stuff, apparently.
Sweet. So when does that happen? The 90s?
Well, it's one generation down.
So the
So
80s.
probably the 90s. 80s or 90s. Christopher says that he doesn't have a son. And Spock says, exactly. If we don't return you to Earth, you'll never have a son to man this Saturn probe.
So I guess here's an idea. We harvest your genetic blueprints and create a clone and send him down to basically act as you, both amnesia, while we take you off into the far future and we go on space adventures together.
Yeah, that sounds more fun.
Yeah.
In the conference room, Kirk, Spock, and Christopher try to work out how to return him without changing history. Spock says that since the plane has crashed, they have no way to explain why the captain is still alive. Also, the plane's cameras took pictures of the Enterprise, and the military base would have recorded the radio transmissions where he describes the ship.
That seems like a bit of evidence you already have, just laying around.
But on the bright side, Spock has probably figured out a way for them to get back to their own time.
Cool. Wait, Spock just invented time travel?
Yep.
Okay.
Out of nowhere. Christopher offers to go down and help them get the tapes, but everyone says no, because you're obviously just trying to escape, dude, and he just contents himself with drawing a map of the base instead.
All right, so the crew is demonstrating a little bit of competence today. Very good.
A little. Kirk and Sulu beam down to the Air Force Base in full uniform. Full bright yellow uniform.
Not even a simple disguise, not even like a trench coat and a hat. Just, it's like, here's our Starfleet uniforms. Hooray!
Yep. They sneak into the records room where they find a primitive computer that they have both seen in museums.
It's old-fashioned stuff. Where's the floppy drive?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, that's kind of neat. I have yet to see one of these computers in a museum.
Yeah.
Personally, like where are these museums that have these reel-to-reel computers in them?
Maybe the Smithsonian? Shrug?
Maybe. I mean, it would be kind of neat. I want to find one.
Yeah. I've seen computers like that just kind of laying around places, but
Yeah, me too. Kirk and Sulu remove the computer tape, but are caught by an officer who holds them at gunpoint.
Oh no, they've been cut. Red-handed.
Yep. On the ship, they're worried that the away team hasn't contacted them too long, so they signal Kirk. The Air Force officer tries to answer the communicator, but accidentally activates an emergency signal, which leads Spock to beam him aboard. The officer is so shocked at his sudden change in situation that he is frozen in place and does not move for the next 3 scenes.
Yep. Just stands there, kind of hunched over, and to the point where they just sort of walk up and take the gun out of his hand, and he doesn't move. He just kind of maybe glances around a little bit, but that's about it.
This is our oafish comic relief military character.
Mm-hmm.
Now they've got 2 people on board that they don't want, but this guy now lives in the transporter room.
Yep. It's like, well, we need to reduce how much information he has. We'll just keep him here.
Yeah, it's kind of it's a really swift learning curve we get here.
Yep.
Because they bring Christopher aboard, and they're like, oh, we're going to give you a tour of the ship and tell you everything that's going on. And then Spock's like, that was dumb.
Yep.
They're like, oh, well, we've got a new one. Let's just keep him in the transporter room so he doesn't see anything more than he needs to.
Yep, just kind of avoid trying to say anything to him if you can.
Kirk and Sulu continue to sneak around the base where they find a film room. They find the pictures that they need in the dark room but trip an alarm.
Mm-hmm.
Kirk has a really ridiculous protracted fight with some Air Force officers. Really ridiculous. He's swinging off of door frames and jumping over people. It's insane. Yeah,
it's like, okay, Kirk is suddenly going to be like your kung fu action hero here, and just going to beat up like 3 guys all on his own there, and he actually holds his own for a while because it is so ridiculous. He's able to pull off this stuff that wouldn't actually work in a fight.
Yep. Also, all 3 of the people he's fighting forget they have sidearms.
Yep. Oh, it's a fisticuffs time. Okay, I'll put my dukes up and. Oh, I have a gun. Who cares?
Sulu beams back to the ship, but Kirk is captured.
Yeah. Well, I guess that happens.
Scotty reports the engines are ready, but they still need to get Kirk back before they can leave, and Spock calls for Captain Christopher.
Well, at least we got one captain, right? We could just use him, right?
Yeah, you traded captains.
Yeah.
Back on the base, Kirk is being interrogated. They ask how he got to the base, and he says that they wouldn't believe him because he just popped out of thin air.
Yep.
And some other stuff. This is actually a pretty funny scene with the back and forth of the interrogation.
Yeah. In fact, this might be one of my highlights here.
Yeah.
It's like, you got a name?
The ending here is he's just like, we're going to lock you up for 200 years. And he says, well, that should just about do it.
Yep. It's like, oh, yeah, that makes sense, actually. Okay.
Yeah, it's just fun. I don't know. It's like there's some weirdly funny comedy scenes in this.
Yes.
On the ship, Christopher is demanding to be taken down to the base if they want his help getting Kirk. So Sulu and Spock beam down with Christopher.
So, Christopher, don't run off, please.
Yeah, I just love this, too, because they're going to beam down. And Christopher stands on the transporter.
Yep.
But then Spock has to drag him over to the actual transporter pad. Which is just fun, because it's like, he doesn't know how this thing works. Which you don't really see in other like time travel things. Like, they just kind of magically know how to use the technology.
Like, oh, here's this thing centuries beyond me. I'm going to learn everything about it in 10 seconds. Cool. All right.
Yeah.
Good to go.
Well, this one's just kind of fun because he's intuiting how it works from watching them, but he doesn't get the nuances of how it works.
Yes.
It's like, oh, I stand in this box. Oh, no, you have to stand in a specific place in the box.
Just all these good details. Yes.
Seeing the transporter has freaked out the other Air Force officer who's still there. So the transporter officer asks what he'd like to eat, and then he surprises the guy by making his request come out of a food dispenser.
Oh, yes.
This is kind of funny, but I don't understand this because they had automats at this time.
So it's like, oh, this is so amazing, but this is exactly what we have down on Earth already, huh?
Yeah. You have a kitchen behind that wall? Wow.
With a push of a button, you too can get the cooks to give you exactly what you want.
Back at the base, Christopher and Sulu and Spock just knock out a lot of guards.
Yep.
Willy-nilly. There's a guard, knock him out. There's a guard, knock him out.
And there is a little bit of a, with Spock sort of heading off into the other room. And then Christopher starts, it's like, hey, where are you at?
Yeah. Well, Christopher grabs a gun and tells them that they have to leave him there. And then he keeps yelling for Spock to come back into the room. But Spock has anticipated him, and he just appears behind him and nerve pinches him.
Yep. Spock is ninja.
Spock is just figured this episode out.
Yep.
Every time they need something to happen, Spock is just like, I anticipated this, and I have a solution.
So maybe Spock just thinks about time travel a whole lot.
Possibly.
Yeah, it's like, because it's like, oh, I'm the only one who can figure out how to solve the time travel, problem here. So I'm just going to do that now. So hooray! I'm doing my calculations in my head. Yeah, I haven't already done this 5 years ago or something like that because I think about this stuff all the time.
Well, they should have done it before because we'll get into that in a minute. But this is supposed to be a sequel episode, so they should have thought about this. They get back to the ship, and now that they've gotten all of the evidence destroyed and rescued Kirk, Spock explains how he's going to get them all home. So, in theory, if they go full speed at the sun, it should slingshot them around at a high enough velocity that they'll go back into their time warp and get back home.
Cool.
Spock says that as they move toward the sun, logically, I guess, they're going to be going backward in time. And then when they swing around and come back the other way, they're going to be moving forward in time. Sure.
Yeah, I guess. What?
So, since they're going backward in time first, they're actually going to pass the point at which they got there originally. Which means when they come back the other direction, they can beam Christopher and their other passenger back to the moment they picked them up. And also, they're going to have no memories of what happened because what happened didn't actually happen.
Wait a moment, what?
Yeah.
What? This bit makes no sense.
No, it doesn't. I mean, it would make sense if everyone lost their memories.
Yes.
Like, somehow your brain needs the, temporal continuity to function, so when you go back and change it, it stops remembering things. That doesn't make any sense either, but at least it would be consistent.
Yeah, it would be a rule, and as long as you follow the rule, then it would make sense.
Yeah. This is not a rule. This is just some random junk.
Yeah. The best I could sort of figure is that they're trying to imply that there is like some paradox and the timeline would be sorted out, but they'd still have to sort of, quote, get rid of the bodies.
Yeah, pretty much.
And so, like, them traveling back to the future would result in them not necessarily having come back in time to that point, but still something weird would have happened as far as, like, weird flux, multiple timelines happening simultaneously.
I guess. Like, this, I don't know. We've only got one paragraph left here, so let's finish this up and then talk about time travel.
Let's get going.
They implement their plan. Christopher romanticizes about being in space because apparently he was going to try to join the space program but didn't make it. Now he's in space. Good job. Spock points out that the chronometers have started moving backward. I want to know what kind of chronometers these are that seem to operate independent of normal ship relative time.
I guess as far as sort of ideas that I've sort of thought about on this particular front is that there is star tracking, like in general navigation, like in even in like military aircraft, like before GPS. It's like, well, we need to be able to figure out where we're at. It's nighttime, so the sun's not up, the moon's not up as well. But we have a clock, and we got a cameras that can pinpoint some stars, and by those stars we can sort of figure out where we're at. You just take that to the next level. It's like, okay, here are these stars, but the stars actually move through space, and they're for the most part, as long as it's within like some 100,000 years of the present, you can sort of predict where the stars are going to be, forward or backward in time. And if your clock is basically set via that, figuring out where you're at and then where the stars are relative to your location, then you'll be able to figure out both when and where you're at, assuming you can do all the math involved.
So it's a time sextant.
Yes.
Makes as much sense as anything. As they pass Earth again, they beam Christopher back into his plane just as they beamed him out, but this time the Enterprise is nowhere to be seen.
So they just sort of popped out of existence. Obviously, the Enterprise has been erased from history.
Yep.
They screwed up.
They send their other passenger back as well, and then they brake, which apparently is difficult. Everyone just kind of leans sideways. They're like, we have to brake the ship. Oh no, the engines are breaking up. Nothing really happens, though.
Yep. Forced tension.
Then Starfleet Command calls, and the Enterprise is home. Apparently they did change history at least twice in this episode, because they went from Starfleet Command to United Earth Space Probe Agency and then back to Starfleet Command.
Yep. Maybe that's the thing. When they went back in time, things did change, and that was like an alternative Enterprise there. It wasn't actually the one we've been experiencing so far. Maybe that's why this episode felt so different.
Yeah, they did actually change the past.
So I guess going forward, we're going to have a third version of the Enterprise and the crew, and the characterization that's been established so far might not necessarily apply anymore.
So this episode was originally envisioned as a two-parter.
Yep.
Starting with Naked Time, where at the end of that episode, they accidentally get themselves into a time travel situation. And in that episode, they resolved it immediately and then just talked about how now we have a functioning time machine.
Yep.
The original idea was that they were supposed to end that episode by showing up at the beginning of this episode and like, oh, we're in orbit around Earth.
Whoops. Our little attempt to fix our situation has caused a bit more of a situation than we planned for.
Yeah, which is kind of why this episode just jarringly starts in the middle of everything.
Yep.
It works out. Though, weirdly, they set up that they have this way to time travel now. They have this like cold start intermix thing that they can do with the engines that just sends them straight into time travel.
Yep.
They don't do that. Apparently, we've forgotten about that.
Yeah. So now we got two different types of time travel that are similar but not exactly the same.
Yeah. Now, this is our first Star Trek time travel episode.
Yes. Like, full on, like, we're in a different time period. Hello.
Yeah. And it's weird it's a little interesting and weird that so often Star Trek goes back in time.
Mm-hmm.
There's very few examples I can think of where Star Trek or a similar sci-fi TV series has actually gone forward in time instead of back in time.
Yeah, I guess the main sort of example would be of going forward in time would be Doctor Who, but that's kind of part of the premise. So
Yeah,
everything else is like no, it's this. We only go this far in the future, and then yeah.
and I only say that that's interesting because I couldn't find very many early examples of that. I was doing some digging. I thought this is an interesting opportunity to actually get to talk about time travel a little bit, because not a lot actually happens in this episode. Yep. It's kind of fun and sort of adventure-y, but it doesn't really hold together, and they kind of get themselves back to where they started at the end with nothing actually changing at all.
Yes, we got status quo rules once again.
Yeah. So they really don't do that much in this episode. It's a lot of like farting around between some kind of funny set piece moments.
Mm-hmm. And that's fine.
Yeah.
But it still doesn't kind of matter.
So I guess the main thing with the episode, before I launch into too much time travel discussion, it's less a time travel narrative as it is kind of a we have to kill the witness narrative.
A bit, yes.
The whole debate is kind of we have done this thing and we have this witness. We can't let the witness tell people what happened, but we also do not want to kill the witness. So what do we do with this witness?
Mm-hmm. Now, this sort of plot line shows up a number of times in Star Trek, but it's usually as far as it ends up as a Prime Directive episode, like, oh no, the natives have discovered us, and now we gotta figure out what to do. Uh-oh.
Yeah, but we haven't encountered the Prime Directive yet.
Yes.
Or even General Order 1 or 2 or whatever they call it when we hit it in this series.
Ah. And so you gotta have other ways to go with it.
It's an odd one, because they start with, we can't let him go because he knows too much about the future.
Mm-hmm.
And apparently he can manipulate stocks or something.
Yeah, via knowing things that don't connect to stocks at all. Okay.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is I should invest in spaceship stocks. Huh.
Yeah, where do I buy spaceship stock? But then later, they're going to send him back.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem is there's physical evidence.
Yes.
They say, like, we can send you back, and you will just be taken as a weird, crazy person who saw a UFO.
And then teleported somewhere and survived an airplane crash. Cool.
Yeah. So, like, that, I don't know. None of it makes actual sense if you think about it for
not
a
really.
minute. And then at the end, they finally just reveal that none of them are going to remember any of this anyway, so it doesn't matter.
So it's not quite a Deus Ex Machina here, but it's pretty close.
Yeah. But since this is the first time we've done time travel, I looked up a bunch of stuff on time travel because I was thinking I don't actually know the historical context of time travel.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of our other storytelling tropes and genres, like we talked about last week, the arena champion combat kind of stuff goes back to possibly even our earliest known written narrative. But time travel is kind of a slightly more modern concept in the way that we think of it now.
Yes.
So I read a couple of theories on this. Some of the early time travel like storylines are kind of your Rip Van Winkle. You had some of this in ancient Hindu mythology and ancient Greek mythology.
Sort of you set up a series of events, or you see the world as it is now, and then you are out of time for a little while, and you come back in, and suddenly, oh, the world is so different. I can sort of compare it from how things have evolved, changed, and this is something new that's good, or something bad that's now here, and I can sort of reflect on this possible future time.
Yeah, but what's interesting is it's not that much of a reflection most of the time. Mm-hmm. It's usually something bad.
Yeah.
Like there's a Hindu story where a guy, I am not even going to try to pronounce the names so that I don't mess it up that badly. But the guy winds up meeting the creator god and then comes back to Earth, and it turns out that, hundreds and hundreds of years has actually passed in the few minutes he was talking to the god.
Oh, this is
And you have a similar thing with kind of the Iliad, I believe, where they wind up on that place where they like eat drug flowers and wind up just partying.
Yes, the Lotus Eaters.
Yeah, the island of the Lotus Eaters, where it seems like you're enjoying yourself for an afternoon, and really, years and years and years have passed.
So you better get going before everyone that you know is dead, and then everything's sad.
These are kind of cautionary tales of like, especially the Lotus Eaters is kind of a don't waste your life partying cautionary narrative.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of these other things, like the kind of Rip Van Winkle storyline and other things where people magically sleep for several hundred years, turn into kind of this narrative that's less about let's explore the advancement and interesting things of the future, and more of no one remembers me and I have been forgotten. Isn't this a tragic outcome to my life?
I mean, yeah. I think sort of I've written a story that's kind of echoes that a little bit myself, actually. If you don't mind me veering off that direction for a few moments.
Go ahead.
So it was basically the premise is that people were in the near future were experimenting with time travel, and they figured out a way to sort of do it, but it relied on certain conditions to be met, etc., etc. And they could also recall people from the future that had been sent forward in order to sort of scout future events, and then you come back and then report on things. But the further off in the future you went, the longer that delay before you were called were. So if you were, say, a century in the future, you'd like have a day. If you were 1,000 years, you'd have like a month. If you were 100,000 years, well, it'd be a lot longer. And so this guy is supposedly sent about a century into the future, and things are so different that he quickly realizes, oh, this is not a century in the future. This is more like 100,000 years or more in the future. And no one remembers anything, about human civilization, in fact. In fact, the only person he runs into there is some sort of strange creature that is obviously intelligent and claims itself to be human, but doesn't speak, any language he recognizes, doesn't look human at all. In fact, barely looks like something from Earth. And so he's kind of weirded out. And it's like, wow, this is such a strange environment, and everything's so radically different. I have no way to figure out exactly what happened. Everything that I knew is now gone. Let alone anyone remembering me. Human civilization is more of a myth than anything else.
Yeah, you get into that. It kind of gets into this similar kind of echo with what is considered to be the first proper sort of science fiction time travel story.
You talk about some sort of Wells?
Yes, H.G. Wells is The Time Machine.
Mm-hmm.
Which it's credited as the first time travel story. I think it is the first kind of modern time travel story. I would actually argue that the first proper time travel story in general was Charles Dickens' Christmas Carol. Oh,
yeah, Ghost of Christmas Futures.
Yeah, all of that is time travel within a single person's lifetime.
Yes.
But it's still kind of a like more modern style time travel narrative than some other things that you get. The time machine story has a very similar vein to these other ones as the kind of cautionary tale of the future, kind of the same way that Christmas Carol actually did, with Ebenezer Scrooge seeing his tragic outcome in life, and being motivated to change it and become a better person. The time machine future has this kind of narrative of, if we keep wealth disparity and working people doing all of the hard labor, we will get into this kind of horrible dystopian future that I am positing.
Yes. And since we're almost there, we should probably remind people the Time Machine's pretty good. Anyway.
Yeah, The Time Machine is a good book too. I'm imagining most people are familiar with it. It's not kind of worth going into all the story details.
Yeah.
Suffice it to say, it is about a man inventing time travel and going very, very far forward in time to see how things work out.
Indeed. And they don't look out so good.
No. Interestingly, if we're going off of this forward-looking time travel narrative, you have a really stark change between time travel, the H.G. Wells story, which was published in 1895 and then made into a movie in the 1960s.
Yes.
But then in the early 2000s, you got the reboot Time Machine movie, which was terrible. It was a horrible movie.
It was very kooky and awkward. It had a couple of elements I liked, like the crazy computer library system. That was pretty cool.
Yeah, it did have a couple of neat little things in there. But I think the really interesting thing, and the reason I'm mentioning these two to juxtapose, is because I think it shows the kind of through line of thinking that we needed to get time travel as a science fiction story element. Because in the reboot movie from the early thousands, you had this narrative of, I need to go further forward in time in order to find someone who understands this problem that I'm having. I lack the knowledge to solve this kind of temporal paradox I've wound up in.
Yes.
So if I go further forward in time, I will find a sufficiently advanced society that has figured this out.
And I think that one of the lines is, it's like, I can't help you. Well, maybe I can, come back in a few centuries.
Yeah. And see, I think that this gets into this interesting theory that I was actually reading on why time travel is such a recent addition to science fiction storytelling. Because for thousands and thousands of years, the progress of human civilization was actually very, very slow compared to what we think of it as today.
So sort of jumping into the future, it's more of a who is alive and who is dead, as opposed to how things have changed as far as like how the world works.
Yeah, basically, your grandfather would have lived more or less the same way that you did now because you were just a family of inherited farmers or something. Technology did not really have this kind of sudden jumping change that we are used to in modern times. But with the Industrial Revolution, all of a sudden technological progress started moving at this exponential rate that we are used to now, where the beginning of a single human's lifespan and the end of a single person's lifespan winds up in such a radically different society.
It's like, okay, we kind of got some, mills producing like cloth and things like that. That's pretty cool. And then it's like, oh, and by the time the end of my life was, we got like indoor plumbing and like electricity. It's crazy.
Yeah, a single human lifespan, like 100 years now. Like there's a reason that like Star Trek is set 200 years in our future, because 200 years seems enough time to reach what we would consider magical levels of technology.
Aye.
But if you were setting this in the Middle Ages, 200 years was a single conflict. They have the 200-year war where like several generations were fighting the same war for 200 years with basically the same technological level and societal structure through the entirety of it.
Like, I want to be king of France. I want to be king of England. Let's fight for a while.
Yeah, and the technology didn't really shift that much. So it's not until you got into rapid technological and societal change that time travel really became something that would be interesting. You can see the change happening. When you can't see the change happening, it's hard to conceive of how much the world might change in another 100 years or in a time span that you wouldn't be able to see.
Yeah, the world goes from effectively static to something that is dynamic.
Yeah. So yeah, winding up in this more dynamic system means that time travel becomes a much more interesting narrative device. Like even in the other stories that we were mentioning, the Lotus Eaters and the Rip Van Winkle and things like that, they spend a couple 100 years asleep for all intents and purposes.
Yes.
But when they wind up back, it's a recognizable society. It just has different people in it.
Yeah,
You don't come back to a markedly different landscape with technology and things that you don't understand. You come back to a place where people don't know you.
Yeah, it's like, this is a situation where you're not going to like wake up and it's like, oh, there's giant glowing towers everywhere. That's strange. How does that work?
Yeah.
It's just more of like, oh, there's a new house over there. Cool. That's for your cousin's great grandkids. They don't know or care who you are. Congrats.
And that's why it's kind of an interesting one. I think that the time travel we get in these sorts of TV shows is it's almost always going back in time.
Yep.
Because the TV show is already set in our future.
Yes.
So the TV show itself is already a version of imagined time travel.
So it's like, well, we need to sort of draw the distinctions here, the contrasts. So let's send our future people into the past so they can interact with us, and we'll be amazed by them. It's like, oh, this really is kind of crazy, futuristic magic here.
Yeah, if you think about it, it's really kind of the same storyline, just on the other side.
Exactly.
The character from our time is seeing life 200 years in the future. We have just been put in a position to empathize with the people from the future instead of having our point of view character be the person from our own time period.
I got something else to talk about as far as time travel stuff goes.
Okay.
So it's sort of, I've been sort of poking out a little bit, but it's basically could be broken down as to the butterfly effect.
Ah, yes.
Dun,
paradoxes.
Dun, dun. So, if you're unfamiliar with the butterfly effect, it's the notion that one small thing can lead to a much larger change elsewhere. You can insert song the Mandelbrot set song here, but so the butterfly flaps its wings, cause just the right conditions to spawn a hurricane half the world away, and that has been applied to the notion of time travel, including in a movie called The Butterfly Effect.
And actually a short story that I'm forgetting the author of. That was the original impetus for the term.
Nice.
The butterfly effect in the short story is a person goes back in time to see dinosaurs in kind of a tourist idea. And he is specifically told not to touch anything.
Yes.
And he accidentally steps on a butterfly.
But then, and so when he gets back to the future, things have changed a bit.
Yes, he comes back to a radically different future.
Because a small change here has, repercussions. It causes small changes elsewhere, which then come about and result in much larger, net effects overall.
Yeah, it's kind of the basic idea of chaos theory as they use it in sort of meteorology, is the way that I had it explained to me. Was that a very, very small change in an initial input can create a massive change later on over time.
Yes.
A very good way to visualize this that someone showed me was if you're holding a marble over a hill, like over a mound in the earth. So you have this like smooth curve hill and you're holding a marble immediately above it. If you move the marble 1 centimeter to the right, it's going to hit the right side of the hill and roll away to the right several feet.
Yes.
But if you move it 1 centimeter to the left, it's going to hit the other side of the hill and roll down the left side of the hill several feet to the left. So where you moved it initially is only a couple of centimeters, but where it winds up a minute or so later is actually feet and feet apart.
Exactly. And so, you got the same physics, you got the nearly the same exact starting place, and you got, all the conditions are perfect for, the same thing potentially happening again, but it's going to be very difficult to reproduce that just because there is going to be inevitably some small change here. Oof. Where was I going with this? Captain, help me. Where was I going with this?
You started with the butterfly effect, and then we talked about that for too long.
Yes. So butterfly effect. And so it's I was sort of poking out, it's like, maybe they've changed history. Now they are the probe agency, and now they're back to the Federation sort of stuff. And, given that they're sort of kind of undoing everything that happened this episode, that doesn't necessarily hold up as far as sort of like, oh, this is kind of a jokey version of it. But in the Star Trek, in other situations, that exact thing happens. There's completely spacing on the name of the episode, but original series where the Guardian of Forever, right?
Yeah, the city on the edge of forever.
Oh yeah. And then they go back in time, and oh no, we've changed history, and now we got to go fix it. And when, like in Deep Space Nine, when they got the Bell Riot stuff, there's Yesterday's Enterprise, Next Generation, where all these sort of time travel stuff, something small happens and it results in massive changes in the sort of the quote, our future, their present. And so, the Federation's gone, or it's war with Klingons, or everything's going crazy.
Well, what's really interesting with the way Star Trek in general handles time travel across multiple episodes.
Yes.
It splits very hugely between one of the two philosophies of time. Because I was just looking up some time travel history, and I stumbled across this really interesting branch of philosophy that has to do with two different perceptions of time and its nature in the world.
Yes. I'm all about this stuff. Keep going.
One of them suggests predestination.
Yes.
The other one suggests something that could have this kind of like flow, this butterfly effect style thing where you don't have a predetermined future. So you have something like the DS9 episodes, like the Trials and Tribulations, which is a kind of really good remake of Trouble with Tribbles, which we haven't gotten to either of those yet, so I won't say too much. But you have something like that, or the Bell Riots episode that you mentioned, or if anyone's familiar with the Michael Crichton book Timeline.
Oh, yes.
You have this version of time travel, which I kind of like narratively, where you go back in time and you do a bunch of things, and it turns out that those things you did were actually the things that happened in history already.
Yep.
So basically it's saying you can't change the past because the past has already happened, so anything you do in the past has already happened and cannot be changed.
Yes. So for the record, that predestination stuff is usually what I go with when I'm writing time travel, but keep going.
So the predestination idea gets into a static universe viewpoint. It is predetermined. It implies predestination because in order for this event in the past to have happened the way it did, you, the time traveler, not only had to be born, but had to get into a situation where you would travel back in time to make these things happen. Therefore, your existence was physically predetermined and could not have happened any other way. You get into this with a very kind of Aristotle and Kant view of philosophy.
It's sort of a mechanical universe situation.
Yeah, it's similar to a mechanical universe. Kant had this very interesting idea of predetermined fields. So if the impetus for an event occurred, the event must happen. And if the event does not happen, then the precursor to the event must not have happened.
Yeah, so, sort of a expression of cause and effect in the sort of this is a necessary situation. Yes,
it is very much cause and effect. There is a cause and then there is an effect, and if there is an effect without a cause, then something has gone wrong.
Yes. Oh no, our universe is imploded.
And this also gets into sort of Zeno and Zeno's paradoxes. He had a set of 4 paradoxes that dealt with time. And it demonstrates what I'm talking about because it examines time as a series of discrete units. The most famous of his paradoxes, and the one that, or there's 2 versions of this, and they're kind of the most well-known, and they demonstrate this effect best. The one that I'll talk about is Achilles and the tortoise.
Yes.
So the idea is that the fastest man alive, Achilles, can never overtake a tortoise in a race.
Because the tortoise keeps moving forward.
Yeah. You have Achilles and you have the tortoise, and then Achilles runs to where the tortoise is. But in the time it took Achilles to move that distance, the tortoise has also moved forward. And then the next time he runs to where the tortoise is now, and the tortoise has also moved forward. And it becomes a smaller distance every time, but it is always, a place where the tortoise has moved on from where Achilles was.
Yes. So inevitably this means that the Achilles will never catch up with the tortoise because the tortoise is always some small, infinitesimally, different distance ahead of him.
Yeah. Now, this philosopher named Henry Bergson looked at these ideas and said that the problem that we are hitting here is that this is examining time as a series of discrete moments instead of as a process. He came up with this idea he called duration philosophy, which contradicts kind of static philosophy as practiced by some of the ancient Greeks. There were a couple of like non-static philosophers in there, but the static philosophy was a very common viewpoint. And static philosophy basically says that items in the universe exist as they are and don't change. So the example they have is like Plato, the person, exists as Plato.
Yes.
When Plato becomes sick, this temporary state of sickness has come upon him. But then it moves off of him, and he is back to what he was previously.
Yes, Plato has been restored to the universe.
Yes, so change is this kind of temporary thing that comes over static objects that then return to being static after the state of change has passed.
Yeah.
But duration philosophy has this idea that everything is a process. Some of the earlier stuff I think was called process philosophy. I'm not remembering that ideally. But it is saying that like everything that happens is a process that has a beginning and an end, and everything in between is on a spectrum of in between. So you don't have a static object, you have a process that you are seeing part of.
Like Plato is a being that is presently existing and doing things in the universe as a process. And part of that process is that he sometimes gets sick.
Yes, and then also the being sick changes him as the process, and then he comes out as someone who is no longer sick, but is not the same person he was before he was sick.
Yes.
And when you look at it this way in the kind of temporal duration philosophy, something like the Zeno paradox stops working, because for Zeno's paradox to function, time has to be a series of discrete units.
Indeed.
In duration philosophy, you start with the beginning of the race, where Achilles and the tortoise are racing each other, and you end with the end of the race, where Achilles has passed the tortoise by a mile.
Yes.
And everything in between happens in between.
Sort of, in some ways, this is maybe some of the I'm not might be talking out my backside there here at this point. It sort of maybe influenced the thoughts about calculus as far as that's going, because calculus is always about breaking down space and time into infinitely small units. That each individual unit is arbitrarily small, but you require all of them over that full distance of space or time in order to understand your problem. You're not just going to be like, oh, I'm going to only cut it up to here arbitrarily. I need all of these in order to do the full calculation of what I'm doing.
Well, see, I think that the mathematics actually does play into it, though I don't have any particular evidence for this. But I have heard the Zeno paradoxes explained as not having a concept of zero in mathematics yet.
Yep.
Because in order to solve a Zeno's paradox mathematically, you have to look at the general trend of movement as it approaches zero.
Mm-hmm. But if you don't got a zero...
Yeah, that's how you solve mathematical equations that deal with zero or infinity, because zero and infinity are almost impossible to work with in math.
Yes, you have to have a certain grip on the situation to sort of get around their peculiarities.
Yeah, so in order to prove that Achilles is going to catch up with a tortoise, you look at the general trend of motion and say, as this distance approaches zero, they get closer and closer and closer and closer. So it logically implies that at zero, which is a point we can't measure, they will be in the same space at the same time.
Oh. Then he can pass.
Yes. So you kind of get into this kind of predestination time travel versus fluid duration time travel.
Yes.
This one, they don't really say what is. This is kind of the general
they kind of sidestep the problem entirely.
Yeah, you get into the general problem of this episode with their lack of definition of things, because they kind of make this thing of like, the future could be changed, but they never really give you any stakes.
Yeah.
It's not like, this mission that the guy's son heads was this landmark moment in space travel because of this. It was a big thing.
Yeah, he was involved in there, and heck, maybe his name was on the project, but he didn't actually do anything, so maybe it doesn't actually matter.
Yeah, you don't really get into any of the oh, this inspired generations of whatever, or this was such a big scientific breakthrough moment that it shaped space travel until we got to our modern idea of space travel in the 2200s.
Mm-hmm.
But not having any kind of actual stated problem with what's going to happen if they don't fix this leaves the episode feeling kind of meandering and purposeless.
A little bit, yes.
And part of it is because we don't really know which version of time travel they're dealing with, because one of them, if you're dealing with the static predestination time travel, you never have to worry about anything because everything that happened.
Yes. You just have to sort of try to make it out alive and you're good.
Yeah, which is a good narrative storytelling thing. You still have stakes for the individual characters because you don't know whether they get out of this alive or dead in the end of the day. But you don't have stakes for the future.
Yeah. You're sort of more relying on we're not entirely sure what all happened in this particular point in time. So really, yeah, if you die in the past, you still die in the past. So try not to do that. But we're not too worried about the future. We're just trying to get ourselves out of the situation.
Yeah. The stakes are very personal, you're trying to get through the situation alive. The other one, the stakes are pretty metaphysical of, the future will be different than I remember it.
So I guess maybe here's a question. If you are fiddling around with time travel and you're able to, be in the past and return to a future, but it's going to be different. Is that something you necessarily wish to avoid, or is it potentially something you would want to do?
That gets into a weird kind of moral question, because I think that really gets into what your views on death are.
Yep.
Because
if you never existed, are you dead?
Yeah. That's kind of the thing. If you can morally examine this and say, someone never having been born, even though they were born in my timeline, is the same thing as them being dead, then by changing the timeline, you are causing the deaths of billions of people.
Mm-hmm. Which might make you feel a little guilty if you are of that sort of a mode there.
Yeah. Which I think a lot of people would kind of have trouble getting away from that if they had lived in that future.
Mm-hmm.
If you went back in time now and changed something and you came back and no one you knew had been born and you were able to remember that, I think it would have very much the same feeling of loss as if they had all died.
Yeah. It's I remember all these people, but they never existed, so...
Yeah, I mean, if you come back and you don't remember that anything had changed, you get into some weird moralistic gray areas.
You're well, then it's like this episode, except in reverse.
Yeah, basically. I mean, you get into some weird moral gray areas no matter how you look at it. But it really comes down to that central question of, is someone having never existed as bad as someone having died?
I think Star Trek actually does kind of poke at this question directly in a Deep Space Nine episode, where I'm not remembering I should have looked it up before we recorded, but the episode was basically that they, I think they crashed the Defiant on a planet that has a weird energy field over it, and they discover that it's populated by their descendants.
Oh, yes, that one.
Yes. And so they're like, well, this is awkward because we'd like to get out of here. But they're like, yeah, you tried that and it failed. But we also don't want to cease existing. So they basically struggle with this exact question. And for the most part, everybody's pretty much on board with, it's like, we're going to pile into the Defiant, we're going to try to take off, and we are going to let the failure happen because we don't want these people to cease existing. And yeah, that means we're going to be stuck a couple centuries in the past, but, it's not so bad, right? We're still going to be able to live our lives for the most part, and sure, some of us are going to die on the way, but, we might be dying anyway, so it's better than the alternatives. because we might be trapped here, either which way. But in the end, the choice ends up being taken out of their hands as for what happens.
That kind of story gets into more of a like personal sacrifice narrative.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm willing to sacrifice this thing in order to ensure that a certain future happens.
Yeah.
Which we get into in other kinds of stories. It's like, this is like a hero narrative of the heroes willing to sacrifice themselves for a certain outcome. It's just a little more convoluted when you include the time travel aspects.
But yeah, I'd still argue it's very much in the same sort of genre of this sort of question, because they do in the episode they do get to know these people fairly well, and so that's sort of what ends up informing their decision at the end. I got one more thing.
All right.
AI personalities and computers.
Ah, yes.
Yes. They can be quirky. Some of them can be fun. I don't think this one was done very well.
It wasn't done very well. It's a much more kind of realistic AI.
Yeah.
It's not really sentient. It kind of reminds me of like Siri.
Yep. It just likes to guilt trip you occasionally.
Yeah, it's not well done. It's a dumb like, women reprogrammed this computer joke.
Yeah, and it's just like, come on, guys.
Which it actually, historically, I just have to point out, historically, that's such a horrible, lazy joke, because in the 50s through the 70s, 90% of the people programming computers were women.
Yep. So should be like maybe the reverse, like, it's like, oh yes, we ran into a planet, dominated by men, and they came up with this crazy macho, over-the-top AI personality, and it's really annoying.
Or they came up with this very computer because they programmed a computer with a woman's voice that keeps flirting with them.
Yeah.
What woman would make that?
Yeah, that doesn't make any dang sense, folks. But it did remind me of the same sort of B-plot done better shows up in Babylon 5 once. The short of the long is that they're trying to reset the system, the space station's systems and computers, so that they can't be hacked by the government they were just rebelled against. And so it's like, well, we're going to have to reset all our command codes. That means we're going to basically have to turn it off and do a full reboot. And they do this, and on the reboot, the space station's AI, which had been turned off this whole time, activates. And it doesn't like try to take over or kill anybody. It's just kind of sassy. And it I think it's voiced by Warren Ellison.
Sounds a little Moon is a Harsh Mistress inspired.
And it's like well, and it sort of like gushes over people in a certain way, like, you should really be taking care of yourself here. Maybe you should go and get some exercise. Could you just shut up, please? Oh, I'm just trying to help you out. Come on. It's just kind of one of those funny things that happens in the episode. They eventually get it sorted out, but it's just sort of like, okay, if you're going to do this sort of humorous side plot, you just make it more.
Yeah, they really didn't go far enough with it to make it funny.
Yeah.
Because the joke that they're going for is just too lazy.
Yeah, too lazy and lame. That's all I got for that. So,
well, we've gone on a little too long, so I think now it's time for the galaxy's favorite game show.
Woohoo! Yeah!
Oh, in this game show, we give out awards for no reason. Yes.
So, what awards do we got today here? I think I got some awards for people.
Yes, Isaac will give out the awards to someone. I don't know yet.
Our first award there. I need to be speaking my announcer voice properly here. So welcome to the game show portion of the program here, folks. Ladies and gentlemen, all you crazy alien critters out there. The first award today is the Time Warp Award, which goes to Spock for figuring out the secrets of time travel in his spare time. What does he win, Gepwin?
I don't know, but I'm sure Spock does, because apparently Spock knows everything.
Yes, he does, doesn't he? He's our expert on all things that we need to know because he knows everything in this episode. Good work, Spock, on being on top of this whole situation. Our second award is the Hollywood Amnesia Award, which goes to Major Christopher for not remembering a thing and being surprised he won an award. Congrats to him. What does he win, Gepwin?
Captain Christopher wins every RPG that came out in the 1990s where the protagonist has no idea what's going on.
Ooh, nice. There's a good number of those, huh? Maybe he's one of the protagonists for one of those little games there. Our third award is the Cat Burglar Award, which goes to Sulu and Kirk for being sneaky cat burglars, and Sulu getting away scot-free and betraying Kirk, obviously. That's what happened, right? What does he win, Gepwin?
Sulu and Kirk win darker clothes. Don't beam down to the enemy installation in your bright gold uniform. Wear darker clothes.
Ooh, that's a very good point. Learn the lesson from this, guys. Otherwise, you're going to run into this problem multiple times in the future. So try to avoid that, please. Let's be less annoying that way. So that concludes the awards section of the program.
Yes, thank you all for joining us on the Galaxy's favorite game show.
Woohoo! Hi!
So, Isix, next week, we have been watching Star Trek so much our eyes are bleeding.
Yep.
You're welcome for that mental image, everyone.
It's just like streaming out. You remember that the one little animated short called Rejected? It's like that, where the guy's eyes pop and it's just a stream of blood coming out, and it's just over the top and ridiculous, and they're just screaming at each other.
So, as we're going to do every 10 episodes now, we are going to do something else. And since I picked last time, this time it was Isix's turn to pick. So what are we going to be watching next week, Isix?
So in general, when I do my picks, I'm going to be going oscillating between a good movie and a not so good movie. So just a warning there. We're just going to start with a good one, though. At least I think so. We're going to be doing the movie Snowpiercer.
Yes, which is it's a really interesting sci-fi movie when you look at it from a science fiction perspective.
Yes.
It's
advanced technology.
Yeah. It's wrapped up in a very gory action movie.
I'll bet, yeah.
Which, anyone who's watching along, I don't know the ages of anybody, but this is a very, very violent movie.
Yeah, there's lots of pain and things happen and people die and there's parts of people and they lose them. So be careful about that if you're watching along at home.
Yeah. So just be wary. Overall, I do think it's a really good movie. I love the kind of metaphors that they play with in this and how kind of very entrenched in the narrative they are. It's really interestingly done.
Yes.
So I can't wait to get to talk about a little bit of that.
I'm really excited. I got like 5 things I already want to talk about, so that's fantastic.
Well, hopefully we can get through the synopsis faster than that one so that we can actually talk about it in less than 2 hours.
Maybe I'll do the synopsis next time.
If you like.
Oh, God. Did I just volunteer for something? Oh, no.
Well, I hope that you all enjoyed. Thanks for joining us while talking about Tomorrow is Yesterday, which is one of the most confusing titles I've had to say.
Oh, Tomorrow is Yesterday on Watches of Tomorrow Today.
Yeah. Oh, God. Join us next week for the much less confusingly named Snowpiercer.
Woot! Next time on Watchers of Tomorrow, Chris Evans talks about how he's a humanitarian. You have been listening to Watchers of Tomorrow, a podcast on science fiction media. Find and follow Watchers of Tomorrow on Podbean, YouTube, Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, Pocket Cast, Spreader, Digital Podcast, and perhaps many more to come. If you enjoy our podcast, make sure to subscribe for more. And where possible, make sure to rate your experience or leave us a review. You may find Gepwin on youtube.com/Gepwin and Twitter @Gepwin. You may find me, Dr. Isix, on youtube.com/Dr. Isix and Twitter @IsixLP. Music is Waveform and Mori's Principle, both by DRKRN. You can also check out the Watchers of Tomorrow Discord channel. Make sure to share the experience with your friends, family, enemies, and alien overlords. If you feel you are suffering from transporter syndrome, please be aware that the next time you step off the transporter, that you, that is now, no longer exists.